Yeah, I've been getting back into Undertale recently, ever since chapters 3 and 4 released, and if you know me, you know I love digging into the deepest depths of a game to uncover any and all secrets. And of course, one of the secrets I found is Gaster. You all know who Gaster is, you've got Entry 17 memorized, you know all the fun value events, but do you know what he looks like? It's commonly agreed amongst the community that this sprite is Gaster's appearance, but it's not confirmed. Normally, I'd go along with it, but there's some potential counter evidence, and even more possible sprites for him. This is gonna be a theory-esque video, and the main reason I'm making it is because I haven't seen any other videos like this, despite how much Gaster is talked about. And most video essays about him only just skim over his appearance, but I think this is one of the most interesting things about the man who speaks in hands. I did quite a bit of extensive research, and I have found this to be very, very interesting. Let's line up the candidates and see the evidence. Candidate number 1, Mystery Man. A very self-explanatory name. This man is a complete mystery, not knowing even the most basic things about him. He only appears in one room, has no dialogue, and immediately disappears upon talking to him. Perhaps this mysterious figure could be the royal scientist? Candidate number 2, Redacted. This censored figure was covered up for unknown reasons, and even his sprite appears to be hidden. It seems even the code of the game wasn't enough to hide him, and Tricky Tony had to censor him outright. Perhaps he could be covering up who the true WD is, or could we be looking too deep? Candidate number 3, The Knight. It's not him! Okay, now that we have 2 possible candidates that could be who Gaster is, let's start looking at the evidence, and more importantly, the counter evidence. Also, get ready to hear the phrase confirmation bias a lot. Let's start with a piece of counter evidence that harms both of these candidates: the Gaster followers and the Goners. These are grayscale NPCs that give lore details on who Gaster was, but that's not what we care about. What we do care about is that their appearance is grayscale, while both of these potential candidates are pure black and white. It doesn't support or harm one more than the other, which is why I mentioned it first. Okay, now we can get into the cherry picking. Let's discuss some points for Mystery Man, as he's by far the more popular of the 2 candidates. First of all, and the most damning point of evidence for him being Gaster, the room and hallway he appears in are both at fun value 66. Gaster has several ties to the number of the beast, notably in his battle stats, which are all just repeating 6s. There's also the fact that the door appearing is the rarest event in the fun value table, with the second rarest being specifically the first Gaster follower for some fucking reason. Like, why is he rarer than the other? I'm getting sidetracked. There's also the evidence that every fun value with a percent chance to trigger is tied to Gaster. The 3 Gaster followers all have a 50 or 20% chance of appearing, and the sound test literally contains Gaster's theme. However, this is not concrete. If the doorway has a 10% chance of appearing, then why is the hallway guaranteed? I know I'm nitpicking, but there's no other hint of the other fun value events when the percent chance fails, so why is this one different? You could argue that it's try to foreshadow it to players who find it, and that they could give a subtle hint for the other ones, but if that's the case, why not just be consistent? Another thing, I've also seen people claim that all of the other fun value events have slight ties to Gaster, but this is definitely confirmation bias. Goner Kid and Clam Girl are fairly easy to explain, they're grayscale. The Wrong Number song does start with a G before it transitions, but there isn't any proof that it's specifically about Gaster, considering it could also be talking about Gerson or Groby. This is most likely confirmation bias. And there's also the phone calls with Sans and Alphas, both of them being stretches. Sans I can kind of excuse as it's heavily theorized he has ties to Gaster, but the connection to Gaster and Alphas are both almost never discussed. The only thing they have in common is that they were both royal scientists. I doubt the 2 even talk together. And lastly is the Nightmare Snowman. If someone genuinely convinces me this is related to Gaster, I'd be incredibly impressed. Now we can discuss Redacted. First of all, there's the fact that he's redacted. The fact that Toby had to censor it already gives us a nudge in the right direction. Second, and most convincing, is that when speaking to him, he talks in wingdings, saying the line redacted in all lowercase. Entry 17 is the only other area in the game to have wingdings as text, which is very convincing evidence. However, this dialogue also supports 2 pieces of counter evidence. First is that the text doesn't have the shaky nature that it does in Entry 17, and second is that he has the standard talking sound. The first can actually be reasonably explained. In Deltarune, Gaster's talking during the intro and game over sequences still, and yes, the person talking here is very obviously Gaster. The second, I can't brush off as easily. Still, I won't rule it out. There's also the fact that the wingdings are full lowercase and with an asterisk, as opposed to the rest of Gaster's dialogue, which is all uppercase with no asterisk. Actually, this can be spun as more evidence. It's heavily theorized Gaster is related to Sans and Papyrus, and considering he has the same talking gimmick as Papyrus during all of his other dialogue, him having the talking gimmick of Sans helps support not only that theory, but the theory that this is Gaster. At least that's what I would have said if this were actual dialogue, so this entire point is basically just my own confirmation bias. However, there's two more points to support him. The first is that this room directly connects to the sound test room, which is an obvious tie to Gaster. The second is the stable. In case you don't know, there's an unused stable in the files of the game. Looking into the source code reveals that you could have used a key and a trash can to unlock the stable, and once you did, this exact sprite would appear and say X in lowercase wingdings with an asterisk. You could view this as well as more support for the tie between him and Sans, but it's one fucking letter. Regardless, the fact that Toby specifically chose this sprite gives us more evidence that this could be Gaster. Now, there's slightly more evidence about Redacted being Gaster than Mystery Man, but these are all just the information I can find in-game. Let's go out of the game. First place is Deltarune. I mentioned this a bit, but let's go deeper. First off, neither of these sprites appear in the game. Second, there's one character that massively resembles Mystery Man, not visually, but in mechanics. The Forgotten Man. They both appear in between rooms at a very low chance and are described almost exclusively as man. It says there is a man behind the tree, and the theme that plays is called Man in the files. This character is speculated to have ties with Gaster, if not being him outright, but there's very little evidence that it is, if we ignore the Mystery Man connection, but this could also support the theory that Gaster is a knight, and Jesus fucking Christ, how deep does this rabbit hole go? Okay, one more point about the Eggman I wanted to discuss, and it's that it supported, the theory that the knight is Gaster, as if you translate egg into wingdings, then it shows a move that the knight can do in chess. And it looks like the Raiders are going crazy, folks. We got a rare case of double confirmation bias. First of all, there's basically no evidence that the Eggman is Gaster, as I've said, so there'd be no reason to translate it into wingdings. And second of all, this is not only a stretch, but also a massive coincidence. Of course, this doesn't matter at all because now we know that Gaster is, in fact, not the knight. This thing just kind of pissed me off and I wanted to discuss it. Now we can talk about the remaining evidence outside of the game. Haha, I tricked you. We're now talking about this Flowey sprite that supposedly mimics the Mystery Man, which could support him being Gaster. Confirmation bias is a hell of a drug. Because of the fact Flowey is in a similar position to the player where they've played the game thousands of times, and if this is the case, they've almost certainly seen the Mystery Man. So this basically confirms nothing other than that Flowey met the Mystery Man, which was rather obvious considering his lore. This is also ignoring the fact that the face is just straight up incorrect. The eyes are being mimicked in the wrong places, yet the cracks are still in the right place, and the mouth is way wider. Additionally, some people have pointed out that the vanishing sound for the Mystery Man can make Gaster's theme when one part is looped, reversed, and slowed. This is an extreme stretch, and Toby has done nothing even remotely this cryptic with his audio. Smile.ogg, this theme that plays in room 264, is just a slowed down version of Muffet's laugh. The fact you need to loop, reverse, and slow down one specific part makes this kind of cherry-picked to an extent. There's also the fact that this disappearing sound is not exclusive to the Mystery Man, but is also shared by the first Gaster follower and Clam Girl in the Switch version. You can actually make the case that the sound effect being shared by the two of them supports the fact that he is Gaster, and while I do agree to an extent, there's one key difference with the disappearing. The Gaster follower and Clam Girl disappear instantly, while the Mystery Man fades away. It's a minor difference, and it doesn't rule out the shared sound effect, but it is something to note. The sound being shared is not confirmation bias. The fact that it has Gaster's theme under 20 Layers of Rubble, however, is. And now, for one last piece of evidence for specifically these two that is actually rather valid, and actually outside the game for once. The official Undertale tarot cards had a card for Gaster that very closely resembled the Mystery Man, but it was removed. I believe I might have an explanation as to why this is, but before that, the tarot cards were stated to be non-canon by Toby, so you can already take the card with a grain of salt. Second, due to just how large a majority of the fandom believes that Mystery Man is Gaster's actual sprite, I'm almost certain that they had influence over it. If Redacted were considered to be Gaster instead, I'm almost certain he'd be the one on the card instead. And second, it was probably removed for a reason outside of just, "Ooh, it's Gaster, ooh, spooky, ooh." It's likely Toby knew his fan base and they'd instantly assume that the Gaster card was canonization that Mystery Man was Gaster. Yes, he stated all the cards were non-canon, but we're talking about the Undertale fandom. The joke writes itself. Even then, it's likely Toby didn't even want any hints at Gaster's appearance in the cards, even if it was non-canon. Okay, so we can rule out this one as a blunder from the designers. So why did I say this was rather valid? Well, it goes a bit deeper. Mystery Man also faintly appeared in the background of the Fangamer vinyl cover of the Undertale soundtrack, but was removed. This was probably for the same reason, but there's one last case of this that is entirely valid. In the I Am 8-bit vinyl release of the soundtrack, both Mystery Man and Redacted were featured on the cover, and Mystery Man was removed, as you expect, but Redacted was not. Why is he allowed to stay, but Mystery Man isn't? You could make the claim that this is just a running joke for Toby now, sort of like removed Herobrine, and while that may be a possibility, I'm not sold on it. There's also other evidence that points to Redacted being Gaster, such as him being on the same row as two of the Gaster followers, but it isn't nearly as strong as Mystery Man being removed. While the cover does have many groups of characters that make sense, such as the amalgamates being next to each other, it's not quite enough to prove that Redacted is Gaster, at least not as much as it supports Mystery Man. Okay, so we've gathered all the evidence and counter-evidence we can, so who is it? Well, this may surprise you, but I don't think either of these are actually Gaster. First of all, there's 3 more potential candidates that could be Gaster. Let's run through them. First off, the Knight. No. Second is that if you flip the Mystery Man sprite upside down, you kind of get a face. This is the only piece of evidence that exists for this being Gaster. And lastly is that it could be some sort of alter ego for Toby, as evidenced by Gaster being on Toby's Twitter every time a new chapter of Deltarune releases, and the fact that Gaster's talk sound are sampled from ABC 123A, which was an audio file from Toby telling people not to leak in the game's secrets. It's not as baseless as the previous two, and I could maybe buy it with time, but if you're telling me that John Wayne Gaster is the same motherfucker who put Papyrus's motif in the Day Dawn theme, I'd kill myself. Okay, so we still have 2 primary candidates and a third lesser candidate, and I still don't believe any of these are Gaster. Concerning how much is completely unknown and just up to theory about Gaster, I really don't think Toby would reveal what they look like before Deltarune was even released, considering how much Gaster takes a part of it. While I don't think you're wrong if you choose either of these 2 candidates, and for the sake of just having a visualization of Gaster, I'm fine with the Mystery Man. I don't believe either of these are the true Gaster, and that we've yet to see who he really is.